we are going to book review about this book, Globalization and Its Discontent, written by Joseph E. Stiglitz. First of all, I will introduce about the author, Joseph E. Stiglitz. He is an American economist and professor at Columbia University. He was awarded the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Science in 2001. He has served as the chief economist of the World Bank and as the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors during the Clinton administration. He is a prominent critic of globalization and neoliberal economic policies. And this book's book rating is quite good because the book has received positive reviews from both academic and popular sources. The book is widely considered to be an important contribution to the debate on globalization and its effects on the global economy. The author wrote the book to offer a critical perspective on globalization and to provide policy recommendations for creating a more just and sustainable global economy. The book was written in response to the growing anti-globalization movement and the election of Donald Trump, which Stiglitz sees as a backlash against the failures of neoliberal economic policies. This book consists of two main parts. Part 1, Globalization's New Discontent. The Part 1 describes the new dissatisfaction of globalization. This refers to people in the developed world who join those in the developing world who are against globalization. It details why globalization's benefits have been less than its advocates claim, why it has made so many people worse off, and why there is so much anger about globalization. And in part 2, Globalization and Its Dissatisfaction, 2002, the contents of the old edition of the book, which focus on the complaints of the developing world, are presented without change. To understand where globalization is today, we must understand how we got here, reflecting the early evolution of globalization when there was an optimistic outlook on globalization. I will introduce about the contents of Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. First of all, Chapter 1 discusses the failure of globalization. The author argues that globalization has not delivered on its promise of economic growth, reduced poverty, and increased stability. Instead, it has led to increasing inequality, job insecurity, and social unrest. Stiglitz, the author, examines the flaws in the economic policies that underlie globalization, such as the deregulation of financial markets and the focus on free trade, which have contributed to the economic and social problems that many people around the world are facing. In Chapter 2 of this book, focus on the multiple dimensions of globalization. The author explains that globalization encompasses social, cultural, and political dimensions. He examines the various ways in which globalization has affected different aspects of life, including the environment, labor, human rights, and democracy. The author argues that globalization has often had negative consequences in these areas, such as the exploitation of workers in developing countries, the degradation of natural resources, and the erosion of democratic institutions. He emphasizes the need to address these issues in order to create a more just and sustainable.
Protectionism. Globalization has some positive effect. In some cases, it has created jobs in developing nations and connected the nation of the world through trade. Yet to many in developing world, globalization has not brought the promises economic benefit. Too often, globalization increased that divide between the have not, with some of the world poorest becoming even poorer. The many worldwide protests against globalization are reaction to the unfairness of the economic structure imposed by global economic institutions, particularly austerity measures that severely curtail a government ability to fund social programs that benefit ordinary citizens. Other demonstrations protest the negative economic effect of trade agreements, such as the North American Free Trade Agreement or NAFTA, and the global institution that govern international trade, the World Trade Organization or WTO. Free trade agreements often force developing nations to import goods from the developed nation, but vital goods may be priced too high for local consumption. An agenda for equitable globalization with shared prosperity. Globalization has not increased economic or political stability in closely interconnected world based on free trade. A developed that for its good and developing nation may cause instability and economic problem in developing nation, such as greater unemployment or financial failure. Global financial institutions have maintained a monopoly over the lending of money to help developing countries grow their industries. But the loans come with the high interest are given only if the borrower agree to strict conditions that limit its ability to serve its citizens, impose austerity or reduce government expenditure on necessary public services, often lead to increased poverty and greatly reduce quality of life among citizens and the developing nation. This chapter introduces the major global economic institution. The original General Agreement on Tariff and Trade became the World Trade Organization, WTO, which oversees global trade and works to reduce barriers to trade. The original International Monetary Fund, or IMF, lent money to developing nations suffering from a financial or economic crisis. The original World Bank was created to eliminate poverty in developing countries. The promise of global institution. Joseph Stiglitz asked the question of why globalization, a force that has brought so much good, has become so controversial. Then he answered, the critic of globalization rightly accused the industrially developed countries led by the United States of hypocrisy. In his view, these developed countries have pushed poor countries to eliminate trade barriers, but keep up their own barriers, preventing developing countries from exporting their agriculture products and therefore depriving them of desperately needed export income. In his view, not only in trade liberalization, but also in every other aspect of globalization, even seemingly well-intentioned efforts have often backfired, underlying the problem of the IMF and other international economic institutions. Stiglitz writes that there is the problem of governance in this institution. In his view, the IMF and the World Bank are not representative of the nation they serve, and these institutions are dominated not just by the wealthiest industrial countries, but also by commercial and financial interests in those countries, and therefore the policies of the institution naturally reflect these vested interests.
To explain the book review about Broken Promise. Broken Promise is there is a stark contrast between the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, whereas in the World Bank dedication to eliminating the poverty has deepened its engagement in the developing countries. The IMF has grown more a lot from and seemingly disinterested in the nation it is tasked with helping. The IMF top-down approach to granting loans is tied to its commitment to the rigid ideology principle of the Washington Consensus, whose primary focus is on fighting inflation and opening market in debitor nations. The Washington Consensus is an agreement between the IMF, World Bank, and the US Treasury to improve strict market policy on developing nations. Of these three institutions, it is the IMF that imposes on developing countries the most stringent version of this agreement. The second one, I will explain about the freedom to choose. The liberation policy of the IMF imposes on debtor nation rarely, if ever, take into account information about the nation need and want. Washington Consensus principles are imposed without thought given to a developing country present economic condition. The IMF often demand that service provided by a developing nation government to be taken over by a private for profit enterprise without learning whether or not this will work. Privatization might have worked, but the IMF believes the market always works perfectly. And then I will explain the East of Asia crisis. The Thai currency, the baht, collapsed in July 1997. Liberation of Thailand capital market had led to the enormous speculative investment. In the value of the baht, when the speculator feared basically that the baht was going to lose value, they sold the currency, which led to its loss of value, which ultimately led to Thailand's financial crisis. Seemingly overnight, the value of the baht fell by 25%. The Thai government tried to support its currency by buying more baht, but its reserves could not cover the extent of the losses. As more speculators pulled their money out of Thailand, the baht went into free fall for many years. Thailand government had maintained sound control over the nation economy. This led of such excellent economic growth that Thailand was considered part of the East Asian miracle of stable nation with the sound and the growing economy. Yet after Thailand succumbed to the pressure from the IMF to quickly liberalize its financial sector and especially its market, massive amount of the hot money poured in. And the nation of part of East Asian miracle were viewed as heaven for the investment because of their rapid economic growth and stability. For the analysis, several of the IMF Washington Consensus policy not only led to the East Asian crisis, but they also made it worse. The author writes the IMF policies not only exacerbated the downturn but were partially responsible for the onset. The IMF had pressured the developing nations of the East Asia to liberalize their market, especially their capital market. which involve global trade in stock, bond, and crucial currency. Market liberation occurred before this nation had structure in the place control any effect of liberation. So the IMF imposed timing of liberation had inherent vulnerabilities. When a developing nation followed the IMF directive to liberate its capital market. That's all about the book review. Thank you.
I would like to continue our book review discussion. This chapter is talking about who's who lost from the Russian side because Russia has been underdeveloped and having a communism economy, which means everything was centralized by by the central government and there is no openness economy. Not everyone can start their own business and not everyone can open their own factory, so they have to rely on the central government. In this chapter also the book discuss about the economic crisis 1998. The crisis started because of the foreign exchange trade, which causing a bubble in the economy. This is very hurtful to the Asia countries such as Indonesia, Korea, and Thailand because of the country, the failure of the transition economy from the country that affected by the crisis, it causing a high inflation, and then the privatization of the company. Some of the company has been privatized and has been fall into the debt situation that caused them to bail out. The 1998 crisis is given a huge shock therapy to the economy. The economy seems fail and drop in the GDP, and the foreign exchange value also drop, and then it's require a market reform. So the country need to pack their currency stronger instead of following the floating rates. For the next chapter is unfair trade law and other mischief. So the Russia country has started a reform. So the reform is some of the economic analysts say is failed because it still doesn't get out from their own communist, but it still follow their own communist principle. Even though the economy started to open up because of the Russia is slowing down in their economy, the US see the Russia economy is not so threatening to them, so they just starting to trade with them. The trading between the U.S. government and the Russia is mainly weapons trade because Russia has a lot of uranium, so the U.S. government bought uranium from the Russia government. There's also a question raised about whether the Treasury could straight the face of the U.S. economy because the financial condition at that time allow U.S. to sell their Treasury. Because of the 1998 crisis, the U.S. Treasury is very valuable, so a lot of people wanted to buy the U.S. Treasury to defend themselves in the. So, in this chapter, we are discussing about what Russia should do and also the Asia countries should do. While between that, China has started to pick up in pace and started to chase US in the economy because China did not follow the IMF ideology and they started to open their market, and then they give an incentive to a lot of company from outside to do business in their country because they are able to lower the cost of production and the labor, which is given the China a tremendous edge in in terms of catching up to US. Russia, the lesson is that Russia should go beyond their their traditional economy and have to look for a new market. They have to focus on getting their budget straight and control the growth of money supply. The Russia have to also strengthen their growth and focus only in growth because it will give them a lot of foreign direct investment. They have to create an investment friendly environment, and also they have to rationalize their country policies, so the business that coming to Russia is not very hard to set up the business, but it's easy. Thank you. Uh, that is the book review from my part.
Chapter of this book is talking about IMF and its new agenda. In summary, this book largely has a lot of criticism on the IMF, but the criticism should be about the actual circumstances, economic structure, and near-term outlook of each case. Looking at the policy of the IMF, as if the organization was pursuing the interests of the financial markets rather than simply fulfilling its original mission of helping countries in crisis and furthering global economic stability, it is seen to be a set of intellectually incoherent and inconsistent policies. A related area where the IMF needs to be pressed hard is its crusade against inflation. Hyperinflation can be severely damaging to economy, but there is no evidence that moderate inflation hurts economic performance. On the contrary, so long as it is under control, the inflation in the low double digits can help economic development in countries with poorly developed financial matters. Another area where IMF should be questioned is the level of microeconomic detail it frequently requires in framing a stabilization program. As noted, this detail sometimes requested by foreign economic officials hoping to invoke IMF authority to press their agenda to reform on reluctant colleges. This is an appropriate assignment for the World Bank actually and its agencies, not for an institution like IMF. The fundamental reason that leads to a multitude of problems that the IMF have objective that are often in conflict with each other. The IMF believed that the capital market liberalization would lead to faster growth for the developing countries. The IMF never wanted to harm the poor and believed that the policies it advocated would eventually benefit them. It believed that the discipline of the capital market would help poor countries grow, and therefore it believed that keeping in a good state with capital markets was of first order importance. Of the author that globalization can be reshaped to realize its potential for good, and that the international economic institution can be reshaped in ways that will help ensure that it is accomplished, is influenced by various factors, which are first, interest and ideology. Some disagreement about economic and social policy in our democracy, which some are about values, environment degradation versus higher GDP, the poor to move out of poverty, democracy, and others. The second is about the need for international public institutions to overcome many issues, from local issues such as local pollution, national issues to global issues such as 1998 global crisis and global environment. The third is about governance. So far, the failures of globalization in setting the rules of the game, commercial and financial interests, and mindset. One thing obviously happened is the dualism of the authority, which the finance minister and central bank governors who sit around the table at the IMF making decision is also the trade minister of the WTO. The transparency. The problem of lack of transparency affects each of international institution, though in slightly different ways. For example, at the WTO, the negotiations are all done behind the closed door, making it difficult until it's too late to see the influence of corporate and other special interests. The IMF tend to secrecy naturally to most of central banks. Well, the conclusion from this book is the mindset around globalization itself must change. One of the reasons the globalization is being attacked is seem to undermine the traditional values. The second is about the economic growth, including that induced by the globalization will result many things such as urbanization, undermining traditional values, rural society. Globalization is being challenged around the world. There is a lot of discontents with globalization, but actually globalization can be a force for good. It is clear that there must be a multi-pronged strategy of reforming. One should be concerned with the reform of the international economic arrangements, but such reforms will be a long time coming. Thus, the second prong should be directed at encouraging reforms that each country can take upon itself. The developed countries have special responsibility, for instance, to eliminate their trade barriers, to practice what they preach, to reform the international institutions that govern globalization. It has both the intellectual equipment and the experience to provide in his book. He explained very clearly from many reasons of the failures of globalizations, many crises even such as East Asia crisis and Russia, and describe a lot about institutions involved in globalization such as IMF and WTO. At the end of the book, he suggested the way to stride to a reformation strategy. Thank you and hope you enjoy it.